All right. Yes. Very good. Well, tonight William Maclure gets his due, right? That's right. Those who don't know, we're kind of high on Bill here at the WMI. A few new faces in the room tonight. I'm Ryan Rokicki, the director of the Working Men's Institute. I'm also the co-chair of the Owen-Maclure Bicentennial Committee. Could my fellow committee members please stand up? They've been working really hard on getting wonderful programming here. And my co-chair, Diane Sanders. You're definitely going to be hearing a little from her tonight of the future events that we have coming. But tonight, we have Dr. Greg Brown talking about the guy that's closest to the WMI's heart, as I've said, William Maclure. What would New Harmony be without William Maclure? Dr. Brown is going to help us answer that tonight. For one, we wouldn't be sitting in the William Maclure room for the dissemination of useful knowledge at the Working Men's Institute in New Harmony, Indiana. Think about that for a second. Dr. Brown wanted to do his own introduction tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Set that up so I can time myself when I get started talking. Make sure we're not still here on Tuesday. I am Greg Brown, and my connection to all this is that I showed up at the University of Southern Indiana, ISUE back then, in 1974, just in time to be Don Pitzer's student, right when he was gathering people interested in communal studies from across the United States here in New Harmony to form a new organization that's now called the Communal Studies Association, and was with him as he started the Center for Communal Studies at the University of Southern Indiana. And I'm one of those kids that just never went away. The years keep going, and I keep coming back, and now I'm happy to volunteer on the boards of those organizations and Historic New Harmony. The things that we're going to talk about, the ideas of Owen and Maclure, the other people in their time period who took these ventures into trying to create better communities, became a major part of my education. And when we talk about does it matter, it mattered to me all the way through my career. I taught everything from kindergarten to grad school and ran a school for expelled middle school students. If that tells you anything, middle school students are crazy to start with. So taking the ones that had been told you don't belong and trying to set up a system that let them know they could belong. All of this material on how you build community was very important to us. Now, we'll get to William Maclure. Last month, Rod Clark gave us an excellent introduction to Robert Owen and the events that shaped his ideas and actions before he came to New Harmony. Next month, we'll hear from history of education scholar Gerald Gutek concerning the boatload of knowledge and Maclure's efforts to bring Pestalozzian education to the United States. So tonight, we can focus directly on William Maclure himself. I will be using material from a lot of different sources, mainly four. Backwoods Utopias by Arthur Bester is kind of the foundational book, and he wrote a great deal on New Harmony and the experiment here. Maclure of New Harmony by Leonard Warren is pretty much the only commercially available biography of Maclure that you can get easily if you want to read more details about him yourself. I'm also using The Disseminator of Useful Knowledge, William Maclure's Newspaper and His Essays on Education and Politics by Don Jansen, which is available in digital form from the special collections at USI. Don did a wonderful job of reading the entire Disseminator and then cataloging and giving an index to Maclure's opinions on various subjects as printed in there. and Partnership for Posterity, the correspondence of William Maclure and Marie Duclos Frette. I always pronounce this like Southern Indiana. I'll try and say it right tonight. Fredijo, 1820 to 1833, by New Harmony's own Josephine Elliott. My own interest began with those classes of Don Pitzer's, and he had hoped to be here tonight. He messaged me a little earlier today to assure me that he is getting over some recent health problems, but that he's just still too weak to be with us this evening, but wanted me to extend his greetings to everyone that came out. If I have anything of value to share, he gets a significant part of the credit. I learned about the communal societies in his courses on U.S. history, communal history, and as a senior, his course on the history of American ideas, where I did a paper on education in New Harmony. Adding to the impact of those classes was Josephine Elliott's invitation to help transcribe the letters of Maclure and Fredijo for her magnificent book that I just mentioned. The letters are housed here in the Working Men's Institute archives, and they're a national treasure. Imagine being invited as an undergrad student to get your hands on those kind of primary materials and be trusted to use them. It was an honor that I have not forgotten. They are not, however, easy to read. In addition to using letter forms that we no longer do, like the long S, when they reached the bottom of the page, they simply turned it and kept on writing, in spite of the wonderful confusion of letter tails and flourishes, and the fact that one of the school subjects Maclure apparently didn't like was spelling. This is a sample of cross-hatching that's by another lady that's found in the historic New Harmony archives. Fortunately, for anyone else wanting to research those letters, you can now read them in neat print, accompanied by an exhaustive index that Josephine has provided in her book. And if you want, you could even make arrangements with Ryan so that you could read it in the Josephine Elliott reading room, which is in the corner to your left. Josephine's standards were the highest of anybody I ever met. And if the sources disagree, I default to Josephine Elliott. Now we'll turn to what they tell us about William Maclure. First, he was a very active man throughout his adult life. So I'm going to start with a list of events and dates that would scare a freshman out of a history course. And I don't expect you to be able to read this graphic. If one of my graduate students in education showed me a PowerPoint slide like that, we would have a serious discussion. I only want you to see what I made for myself to sort out Maclure's life events and the global events in the Western world that affected his life as I prepared this for you. I promise you the list I'm about to go through is the abbreviated list, but it won't seem like it. Maclure was born in Ayr, Scotland on October 27, 1763. He received a classical education typical in Europe at the time, his reaction to which became the basis for many of his opinions and efforts in education. He visited the United States in 1778 during the Revolution. He began working as a merchant in 1782 and continued until 1805, accumulating the wealth that allowed his other life endeavors and contributing to his views on economics. Highly impressed with the forming nation, he established residence in Philadelphia and became a citizen in 1796. He became a member of the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia in 1799. In 1800 and 1801, he traveled to Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Prussia, Germany, and France. I was going to remind you before I started into all of those, steam travel's only coming in at the end of his life. We're talking about the era when travel was all by natural means, when I tell you all these places he visits. In 1803, he was appointed by Thomas Jefferson and served as a member of the United States Commission to settle the claims of American citizens for losses suffered during the French Revolution. In 1804, he made an extended visit to Pestalozzi's school in Switzerland. And when he visited the school, he was accompanied by Napoleon and Talleyrand. And when I say he visited, it's not like school visits that I experienced where people waltz through your room and say they know what you do. He would stay for a month at a time to observe in detail what was happening. In 1805 and 6, he traveled to study geology in France. In March of 1806, he entered a contract with Joseph Neef and his school in Paris, assuring that Neef would also learn English in preparation for Maclure helping him to move to the United States. From 1806 to 1808, he continues to study geology in Switzerland, Italy, France, and Spain. He returns to the United States to study its geology, and in the summer of 1808, the American Philosophical Society agreed to publish his Observations on Geology of the United States, the work that is responsible for him being considered to this day the father of American geology. From 1809 to 1825, he travels to study in Sweden, Lapland, Finland, Russia, Poland, France, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, Germany, England, the West Indies, Barbados, Dominica, and the United States. He is often accompanied by Charles Alexander LeSueur, beginning in 1815. In the winter of 1810 to 11, he sent another teacher named Fique-Paul de Rosemont, often just referred to as Fique-Paul in New Harmony histories, to work with Neef, and he made more visits to Pestalozzi in 1811 and 12. In 1812, he is elected a member of the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia and becomes a lifelong patron. I'll add an anecdote that Warren says it must have been his money, because I'll read you some quotes in a little bit about the nature of his comments on subjects. And his popularity may have been that he was a patron, not so much that he was easy to get along with if you disagreed. In 1820, he visited Pestalozzi the final time. In 1821, Madame Fratageot, I always want to say it the other way, Fratageot, arrives in the U.S. and sets up her residence at school at 20 Filbert Street. In 1824, he is continuing his travel and study, and he did visit Robert Owen at New Lanark in July. In 1825, he returns to the United States, bringing Madame Fratageot's nephews, Pierre and Victor. In August, he underwrites a scientific excursion including Say, LeSueur, Haynes, Troost, Carmalt, and Price. In November of 1825, finally we're up to what we're celebrating for the next year and a half, he meets with Robert Owen in Philadelphia, as do the other teachers and scientists, and the decision is made to come to New Harmony. During the famous boat trip down the Ohio, Maclure and Fratageot took side trips in Pennsylvania and Ohio, as well as visiting Joseph Neef, who was now running a school in Louisville, Kentucky. In the summer of 1826, he leaves New Harmony. We hear about that all the time, how quickly they left. He leaves New Harmony, accompanied by Thomas Say and Achille Fratageot, and he visited several other communities, including Yellow Springs, which is an Owenite community that was going at the same time. He then spent the winter in New Orleans, and he visited Frances Wright, who we will hear about in a later lecture, both there and at her community at Neshoba, Tennessee. I promise we're getting close to the end of this endless list of dates, but I want you to get the picture of just how involved this man's life was. In 1828, he leaves for Mexico. I should leave out, in 1828, he starts here in New Harmony publication of the Disseminator of useful knowledge, but he also leaves for Mexico, where he will spend most of the rest of his life. 1833, Madame Patriot dies visiting him in Mexico. 1834, Thomas Say dies here in New Harmony. 1835, Maclure rejuvenates the Working Men's Institute, a non-religious organization with over 24 members dedicated to the teaching of working class people, member to member. And that struck me last month when Rod said, I'm not an academic. This is just important to me. And so I have learned all this, and now I'm sharing it with you. Maclure would have stood up and applauded. That's exactly what the WMI was all about. He also gave 2,259 volumes of his library to New Harmony, $10,000 to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, and he designated the bulk of his estate for the creation of free public libraries in the United States. 1838, he gave the Academy of Natural Sciences another $10,000. March 23rd, 1840, Maclure dies and is buried in San Angel, Mexico. 1855, $80,000 of his estate has been used to establish over 150 public libraries. By 1876, 18 of those remain, and by the century's end, only the WMI. Beyond the normal difficulty of trying to sustain something based on a one-time gift from an outsider, the Civil War happened. And while it's rather tragic that all of those other libraries are gone, we can assume the books were not. Those books probably remained in those communities in other libraries, public or school libraries. We should not assume that the books all disappeared. On my graphic, this little red dot right there is the experiment with the community of equality in New Harmony that we're going to celebrate for the next 2 years. But it is not the end of Maclure's involvement with New Harmony. The dates I read, his involvement continues for the rest of his life, just through his agents. Now we will start and see if we can pull meaning out of all of that activity. What Maclure believed in, he studied and he financed. When he became interested in the methods of pestalozzi, he made 7 visits and stayed long enough to make observations over time. While he was able, he did his own scientific research and he funded others when he could not. His powers of observation were incredible, and his many trips led to publications of findings that earned him that title of Father of American Geology. And my friend who majored in geology said, oh yeah, that's why I know his name. He is still studied by undergrads in geology to this day. When he could no longer travel, he continued funding the work of others. He selected, funded, and financially supported others as his means of demonstrating improved methods of education. He did not claim to be a teacher or a school leader. He found others he believed in, set them up to teach children, and he shared his observations of needed improvements through his agents, Madame Patriot and Thomas Say. His involvement with New Harmony, as I just said, was not limited to that little short period. While we tend to focus on the years of Owen's experiment with the community of equality, and we'll celebrate it, his work goes far beyond that for the rest of his life. To be fair, I want to play up this Maclure versus Owen angle, but to be fair, I also find that criticism unfair to Owen. I think it's much more accurate to say that Owen left his family in charge of his reform efforts here than to say that he abandoned it. And we will have lectures in this series that talk about the accomplishments that came from the work of his sons and others. He continued the school at New Harmony, supervised by Fratigeau and Say as long as he lived. These loyal agents remained in New Harmony for the rest of their lives, communicating with Maclure through letters and continuing to demonstrate new methods of education. So let's dig a little deeper. I do not believe it can be overstated that both Robert Owen and William Maclure were children of the Enlightenment. An age of escaping the rule of both monarchs and religions was intoxicating. Maclure was in both the United States and France during their revolutions. His own work in geology was constantly revealing vast untapped resources available to humanity as the Industrial Revolution constantly promised new and improved methods of production. William Maclure lived in a time of great hope that human beings now, properly educated and supported, might truly accomplish anything they desired to do. If we turned to religious education, we would find that in religion at the same time, there was this increasing emphasis on the possible second coming and millennial traditions. It was a time of great hope. Now, Maclure's personal life. In his personal life, he's rather enigmatic. Leonard Warren says, quote, "Contrasting characteristics abound in Maclure, a man who sought out and explored countries in dreadful turmoil that would discourage business, a wealthy man whose radical opinions could not have endeared him to his associates and upper middle class friends. He was able to afford anything he desired, but he lived frugally and deplored materialism of Americans." Maclure never married and did not appear interested in matrimony for himself. Warren notes that perhaps it would have interfered with his desire to travel constantly, although that doesn't seem to have bothered Robert Owen. In fact, he showed little interest in romantic relationships. While Madame's letters often sounded completely infatuated with Maclure, his replies never did. There is no evidence of them ever having had a physical relationship in spite sharing a house. Maclure was very generous with his property, and she wasn't the only person that he allowed to live in his house. Warren states that Maclure appears to have been asexual. There's no evidence of any relationship either with the young male assistants who accompanied him on his travels, even though some of them did leave thoroughly disgruntled over funding and other disputes with Maclure. It echoes his aversion to worldly pleasures and luxuries that we already noted. He also maintained the simplest of personal diets. He ate so little that some speculate that's part of his health problems, that he ate so little trying to stay healthy that he didn't properly nourish himself. Warren goes so far as to describe his life as one of, quote, lonely melancholy, completely devoted to pursuit of the practical and rejection of any excess. Josephine Elliott notes that he described himself as an egoist. In his letters, he stated that his endeavors and even his correspondence were designed to earn stature and produce a permanent record. Given his clear observations in science and of other people, perhaps that self-observation is accurate. However, we might wonder if it is the proud or the humble that detect egotism in themselves. What is clear in all of the sources is that he was a quick study and very successful in whatever he chose to pursue, in business, in science, and in education. Now, his relationship to Robert Owen. That's of continuing interest to us here in New Harmony. Much has been made of the disagreements and the legal dispute they had over finances and property. Those who focus on the community of equality as a brief, failed experiment also point to the well-documented disagreements between Maclure's scientists and teachers and the rest of the town. I would like to suggest viewing Maclure and Owen with the yin-yang symbol in mind. What appear to be two opposites in the symbol are also harmonious halves of the circle formed by their combination. Both men are products of the Enlightenment and the revolutionary period in which they lived. As already mentioned, the rule of both monarchs and religious leaders was thrown off during their lifetimes, resulting in these great discussions of hopes concerning what forms of society would evolve. And while both France and Spain returned to less revolutionary forms of government, the United States seemingly presented limitless possibilities as far removed as we were from the old systems of monarchy. Both men saw the formation of character in the young and the proper systems of education as critically important to determining the character of future citizens and the capacity of society to function in new ways. They were both influenced by Pestalozzi, Fellenberg, and Lancaster in education, but they clearly did not agree on everything. While they agree on the significance of early training on the character and future prospects of the young, Owen becomes known as the original socialist, but Maclure followed the ideas of Adam Smith and favored small government and lack of interference with the working people whom he constantly identified as the true producers of wealth. While we might consider both of them socialists in terms of believing you could improve the human condition by properly arranging society, both men worked to produce their reforms through private, not government, action. One of these wonderful Maclure quotes: "In all governments of the old world, the laws, customs, and institutions are invented to heap property, knowledge, and power on the influential few, and leave nothing to the industrious many but the hard labor of supporting their extravagance." Maclure did not agree with the central control common to the socialist systems we think about today. He was a clear advocate for the freedom of the individual to make their own path in this promising new society. The writings of Owen and Maclure both clearly show that they really believe there's a coming age of wonder like the world hasn't seen before, whether it's through their efforts or not. They really believe there's a rising tide that's going to make things better for everyone. And he believed in preparing students in very practical ways to prepare in the prosperity of the growing country, not to conform to the pre-chosen behaviors of any central authority, whether it was in the national government or the leaders of the community. Might be why Owen said at times that he thought the kids were running wild from Maclure's school. Also, while Maclure was generous in supporting both sciences and education, he saw himself as far more careful with his money than Robert Owen. When preparing his teachers to move to the United States, Maclure was already carefully supervising all their purchases and their shipping costs of materials and supplies through his agent, Madame. He believed George Flowers persuaded Owen to pay far too much for the town. And on one occasion, he chastised Madame for calling him Owen's partner, as he did not want to be liable for any debts that Robert Owen might gather in this exercise. In the end of their disputes, the arbiter did in fact find that they were partners and established the amount of money that Maclure was to pay. But after he paid it, he owned most of the town and had his own fortune intact. The other major distinction in their yin-yang relationship may be simplified without too much distortion by stating that Owen represents the world of exposition of grand ideas, while Maclure was always on the side of direct action. Robert Owen loved the grand speech delivered to influential audiences, including Congress. Maclure preferred to be in the field, documenting the physical resources of the world, along with creating and maintaining schools where the theories he favored were actively practiced. Two halves of one circle, both of which are necessary for change to be advocated and put in practice. In the end, Robert Owen's approach made him world famous, while William Maclure's practical legacy continues here in the town, and as Ryan said, in the very building where we're meeting. The field of education gives us some clear examples of how Maclure left little doubt about his feelings. I'm going to read two longer quotes. That's one of the most serious parts. One of the most injurious effects of the old artificial system of education, as I call it, is to distinguish it from the Pestalozzian method, is the imprisoning of children for 4 or 5 hours a day to a task so irksome and disgusting, study with nothing but the fear of punishment could force them to perform, after which they are let loose on society for 8 hours, full of revenge and retaliation against their jailers, exerting all their ingenuity to do mischief and indiscriminately to all older than themselves, for considering them all as accessory to their persecution and confinement. Another quote. One would really be tempted to believe that the old system of education was contrived to perpetuate all kinds of prejudices which create trouble and misery, that comfort and happiness, like the forbidden fruit, was made a crime, and that the Christian doctrine that knowledge of this world is folly has been acted upon by all those who formed the establishments for the instruction of youth. Pestalozzian education, by contrast, was practical, starting with concrete objects and ideas within the comprehension of children, and progressing to more practical knowledge that would equip them to take their place in the emerging economies of the world. The practical side was increased by Pestalozzi's disciple Fellenberg, who emphasized the teaching of practical skills to older students. Robert Owen also favored Fellenberg's ideas enough that 2 of his sons attended Fellenberg's school. Robert Dale later described his time there as, quote, a marvelous life. Lancastrian education's use of older students to teach younger ones would help to reduce the foreseen costs of universal education. Again, Maclure was always thinking about what happens if these things become too big and the government's controlling too much and spending too much. So he likes Lancastrian's system for one teacher to teach more students. Authors, including Warren, have stated that both Owen and Maclure favored separating children from their parents. But Warren continues to point out that for Owen, that would be a permanent requirement, while Maclure saw a day where parents who had experienced the better methods of education would be the best teachers of their own children. This is clear in ideas published by Maclure in The Disseminator, criticizing teachers as motivated by wages. He describes Pestalozzian education as the solution and writes, quote, the ultimate effects expected by the friends of the Pestalozzian system were that as soon as all fathers and mothers were educated by it, their children would not have use for any teacher but their parents, who are the natural instructors according to the natural method. This desire for an eventual change away from dependence on professional educators is less surprising, given Maclure's often stated view of workers divided into 2 distinct groups. In his words, All trades and professions may be divided into two great classes: those that give you something solid and useful, and those who give you only air, modified by the throat and mouth into sounds called words. The first is the return of the industrious producers, give you for your money. The second is what the non-productive classes communicate to you, for which they demand an indefinite price, sometimes 10 times the price they would bring if uttered by a mouth without a beard. So how do we bring all this together? I have refrained from calling Maclure Owen's partner because he objected to it himself. My conclusion is that they were two reformers who chose to do their attempted reforms in tandem. While education was a significant part of New Harmony's experiment, it is more accurate to see the community of equality as Robert Owen's experiment, and the introduction of Pestalozzian and trades education to Indiana as William Maclure's simultaneous attempt at shaping the emerging society. While much has been made of their conflicts over both the school and finances, it is also worth noting that their visit in Mexico near the end of Maclure's life was described as cordial, with Maclure still supporting Robert Owen as the promoter of ideas, even if not the administrator of experiments. As for the labels I chose, I have to tell you that Maclure might also object to me calling him a patron. Another quote on patronage. Patronage is a corrupter of morals, a sneaking substitute for force, violence, arbitrary power, and in all political states where the dawn of freedom has yet begun to shine, patronage is the entering wedge of tyranny, slowly but certainly splitting into annihilation the rights of millions by bribing a part to undermine and subvert the comfort, happiness, and freedom of the whole. Patronage is an insidious enemy of the human race under the garb of public good. Now, he's talking about patronage in order to buy political favor and government action. But it may give us some clue as to why he didn't feel he had to be more directly involved in all of his efforts. He was not trying to buy power. I label Maclure as a patriot for his early decision to become a citizen of the new nation, his enthusiasm for new possibilities in the social advancement of all people, and his willingness to put his own funds behind real efforts to enhance the changes he favored. I might have labeled him a revolutionary. In his lifetime, there were revolutions in the United States, France, Spain, Haiti, and a successful war of independence in Mexico. He was personally present during some of them, taking great hope from their promise of change for the people he valued as the producers in society. But he was not a warrior, as the name revolutionary might imply. Years later, as historians studied all those revolutions, this pattern emerged. That even when there's a successful revolution, and you may have a period of extreme violence when people get even with the old power, in the end, there is what some call this convalescent stage. When people are trying to set up, okay, what does it look like? They return to something that looks very much like what they're used to. And as Maclure watched each of these countries go back to more conservative forms, he moved his efforts to the next ones, where he saw the excitement for new ways of living. This is also why we end his story in Mexico. While it's often stated that he withdrew to the warmth of the South for his health, it was also his final move to an emerging society which he hoped would evolve in ways consistent with the promises set forth by the founders of our own country. We will leave him there, where he died and was buried in 1840, after a failed attempt to visit Indiana one last time. However, the move to Mexico was not the end of his commitment here, or the use of his funds to improve education here. Marie Fratigeau and Thomas Say served as his agents in New Harmony until their deaths. As we noted before, his funds were used in his final years and through his will to rejuvenate the Working Men's Institute with assistance from Madame's son Achille. There, members educated each other through lectures on useful knowledge, as we continue to do in these monthly lectures and many other New Harmony events. His estate also established libraries across the region. The results of his efforts were further strengthened by Dr. Edward Murphy, an orphan educated in the New Harmony School of Industry, who donated sums equaling $150,000, resulting in the building where we meet this evening and the auditorium next door. I would argue that this legacy continues in Indiana schools and universities, especially at our own University of Southern Indiana, created in 1965 when local leaders again decided that people in the area had to have access to quality education in order to deal with their changing society. Thank you. And I think we stopped soon enough if there's any questions or discussion.
Listen, I know he was a merchant. Was there ever any, I never found anything. Did you find anything about what kind of merchandise he sold, traded, and things?
Yeah, the things that I assumed were wrong. So used to talking about Owen and the milling industry and all of that. Well, he must be the guy that came over here and sold the cotton back. What I found was that he was more involved in selling the completed goods back to the United States. And after he accumulated some wealth, he did, I don't think he created it, I think he bought a lumber industry. He also dealt in lumber.
My question was kind of related to that because I was wondering what his industry was as well. But it also sounds like his family must have been fairly wealthy too. I mean, if he had a true classical education and was able to do things he did when he was young, there must have been some family wealth there as well.
Yeah, it's his father that tells him, okay, it's time for you to get over to those colonies and see what's going on and get ready to start doing business and start making your fortune. And I think his education served him well, although he didn't like it. He went to Mexico, partially it was for the warmer climate and dealing with his health. But he saw in Mexico, as they threw off European rule, he was very fond of the indigenous people of Mexico. He wasn't so fond of our native population. He found our native population more surly. He liked the people in Mexico. And he really was moving on to the next place that he thought he might have success in working with what the new country would look like. But there's not much evidence of him actually succeeding in creating a school there or having much active involvement. He was very near the end of his life. He had worked for a long time. Yes?
Was his family religious?
I don't know.
Any religious upbringing whatsoever? Or at what point do you see him sort of turning away from religion altogether?
I don't know if his father was or not. I don't think Warren said. It would be interesting to find out whether his father's lifetime also would have been during the Enlightenment. So it's quite possible that his beliefs were consistent with Dad's.
Do you know, is there a connection between, I've always wondered this, Pestalozzian theory and Montessori? Because they seem like they share a lot of common elements. I don't know how far Montessori goes back, but I've always wondered if there's some sort of a connection between those two educational systems.
I, I don't know enough about hers to know if there's any direct connection, but they are very similar. And even Montessori's techniques of you don't teach children you should be responsible, you help them be responsible. They clean up the room when they get done. It's their space. And I can tell you from my own experience with the expelled kids owning the space where they are changes everything. And she's very brilliant on that. The kind of effort you get from students when it really is their place, rather than it's someplace where they're, as Maclure would say, locked up for a few hours, and then the adults show up again. Heidi?
So we often say that Maclure was very influential with regards to David Owen's choices to continue in field geology. Do you find anything written that means? I think we just made that leap, but have you found any evidence to suggest he did influence them in a big way?
I didn't find any direct quote where they say, William Maclure inspired me to do this. What I do see, contrary to all of our emphasis on the fighting and the conflict, I have a very different view of that than most people, is there are relationships across those two groups we define, after the community of equality. Feek Paul changes from the Maclure side to the Owen side. Frances Wright comes and she's involved with the Owens and the efforts to print ideas about the new world. That there's a lot of exchange of ideas among the people that we can easily miss if we go too far into this idea of two divided camps that we're just always taking shots at each other. I don't think that's accurate.
You talked a little about, I understand that he just stood away from Robert Owen for a while and had his own community east of Harmony.
Maclure tried to start more than one separate community. He set aside land for a black community, although it seems to have been like we would criticize liberal white efforts today that don't consult the community you're trying to serve. No blacks showed up saying, whoopee, let us live there. There was the community of Maclure, and the name confuses us because they named it that, splitting away from Owen, but I think they were hoping for a benefactor in the name. It wasn't Maclure that created that group. It was a split off group and they chose the name Maclure.
Farming group?
Yes, yeah, that was the farmers. I'll also just tell you that my whole view of the conflict thing, because it'll be interesting as we go through all these lectures. We tend to have in education this, what I would call a middle class, white bread toast attitude about conflict. And you try and keep everything smooth and everything calm and everything nice. And we look back in history and we say, man, these people were arguing. My own view after studying them and in my own experience with trying to set up alternative systems is if you expect highly qualified people to have a true voice in what's happening and they actually care and you haven't harnessed them so they can't speak, they're going to disagree. They're going to express conflict. It's going to be there. The question is what you do with it rather than avoiding it. And the amount of reformers that were brought into this one little town, the only way there wouldn't have been conflict would have been to have a dictatorial leader that let everyone know you better keep your mouth shut. Those were powerful people, and there was going to be disagreement. But as we get into the other lectures and we talk about some of the things that come out of this effort, all that discussion was highly effective in helping shape this area, this state, and this country. Their effect was large. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Diane Sanders. I'm the Director of Historic New Harmony. Just briefly, I wanted to say thank you to Dr. Greg Brown. That was a wonderful lecture. I think what's really wonderful about these lectures is they're giving us some nice nuance to the characters that we all think we know and love, but we're getting some insight into who they really were. So thank you for doing that. I just wanted to let everyone know what our next lecture is. So our monthly lecture series will be continuing through June of 2027. Next month's lecture is with Dr. Gerald Gutek, who is the Professor Emeritus at Loyola University Chicago and the leading scholar of the history and philosophy of education. His lecture is going to be Maclure's Design for American Education, Integrating the Boatload of Knowledge with Pestalozzian Pedagogy. Say that 5 times fast. His lecture will be on April 11th, which is a Saturday at 2 p.m. here at the Working Men's Institute. As you may remember, Dr. Gutek was supposed to be here for our inaugural lecture in January, but got snowed out, so knock on wood, we won't have snow in April. And we will have a nice little party celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Boatload of Knowledge with some birthday cake and other refreshments. So I hope you'll be back again next month, and thank you for attending tonight, and have a great evening.